Did you know that in one of the most ancient texts in human history, a woman led an entire nation to victory? Amidst a time of war, despair, and chaos, Deborah rose not only as a judge but as a warrior, guiding her people to triumph against overwhelming odds. Her story isn't just a tale of courage, it's a story that challenges everything we think we know about leadership. The Bible is filled with incredible stories, but there's one that often gets overlooked: the story of Deborah, the only female judge in Israel's history. We're in the time of the Book of Judges, a period marked by confusion and moral decay. The Israelites, God's chosen people, were living in a time of constant struggle. They had no central leadership, and their enemies were growing stronger by the day. This was a dark moment in Israel's history. People had forgotten God's laws, and the nation was constantly under attack. They needed a leader who could bring order, guide them through chaos, and protect them from destruction. It is in the midst of this chaos that Deborah's voice rises, a prophetess, a judge, and a leader all in one. Not only did she offer spiritual guidance, but she also commanded Israel's military forces, an extraordinary role for a woman in her time. Deborah wasn't just any leader. She was chosen by God to turn the tide in Israel's battle against a powerful enemy. In today's video, we uncover the untold truth of Deborah, one of the most extraordinary leaders in the Bible, whose unwavering faith and bold courage changed the course of Israel's history. We'll explore not only her wisdom but also her bravery in the face of war, the challenges she overcame, and the lessons we can take from her story to inspire us today. The Book of Judges introduces a series of leaders who guided Israel through times of crisis, but Deborah's story stands out. Israel had no king at this point, and the people were living in a cycle of sin, punishment, and redemption. After the death of the great leader Joshua, Israel fell into disarray. The Canaanites, led by King Jabin, began to oppress the Israelites, and their military commander Sisera became one of the most feared figures of the time. The Israelites were trapped under his rule, oppressed and helpless. But in the midst of this oppression, God raised up Deborah. What's extraordinary about her leadership isn't just that she was a judge, it's that she was a woman leading a nation in a time when men were typically expected to hold such authority. She didn't just offer advice or guidance from a distance. Deborah took charge, organizing and leading the people of Israel into battle. She commanded respect, not only for her wisdom but also for her courage. Her leadership wasn't about holding a title. It was about answering God's call and stepping up when her people needed her most. What makes Deborah's story even more incredible is her relationship with Barak, the military leader of Israel. When God called Barak to lead the army into battle against Sisera, he hesitated. He was afraid and unsure, and he insisted that he would not go into battle unless Deborah went with him. Deborah, knowing the gravity of the moment, agreed, but made it clear that the glory of victory would not go to Barak alone. It would go to a woman. In the end, it was Sisera's own downfall that made Deborah's prophecy come true, and a woman, Jael, would be the one to kill Sisera, fulfilling the prophecy of God's judgment. Deborah's role in this victory is monumental. She wasn't just a passive bystander in the battle, she was at the center of Israel's deliverance. The Israelites won because they trusted in her leadership and God's plan. Through Deborah's courage and trust in God's promise, Israel experienced a significant victory, and peace was restored for 40 years. Her victory is a reminder that God can use anyone, regardless of gender, status, or strength, to accomplish His will. Deborah didn't conform to the expectations of her time. Instead, she listened to God's call, and in doing so, she led her people to victory. Deborah's story is one of defying expectations and embracing God's calling, no matter how impossible it may seem. Her faith, wisdom, and bravery remind us that leadership is not about power or position. It's about following God's guidance and stepping up when the time comes. Deborah's untold truth is that, with faith and courage, anyone can lead, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Did you know that in one of the oldest and most powerful texts in human history, a woman led an entire nation to victory? In a time of war, confusion, and despair, when Israel was under constant attack, a woman named Deborah rose, not only as a judge, but as a warrior. Her courage and wisdom transformed the fate of her people, guiding them to a triumph they thought impossible. It's a story that challenges everything we think we know about leadership. A story so powerful yet often overlooked in the Bible. Deborah wasn't just a leader. She was the only female judge in Israel's history, leading a nation in one of its darkest hours. But what makes her story truly remarkable is not just her leadership, it's the boldness, the faith, and the unshakable trust she placed in God when Israel had lost its way. The time of the book of Judges was a period marked by chaos and confusion. Israel had no king, no central leadership, and the people had fallen into moral decline. With enemies surrounding them, including the powerful Canaanite army led by King Jabin and his military commander Sisera, Israel was vulnerable and oppressed. The Israelites had forgotten God's commands, and the nation was spiraling toward destruction. What they desperately needed was someone who could restore order, inspire courage, and lead them through the storm. And that's exactly where Deborah's story begins. In the midst of this turmoil, she stepped up, not just as a spiritual guide, but as a military leader, a prophetess, and a judge. This was an extraordinary feat for a woman at the time, in a world where leadership was typically reserved for men. Yet Deborah didn't shrink away from this responsibility. She embraced it fully, and Israel's deliverance was a testament to her courage and faith. Deborah wasn't just a figurehead, she actively led Israel into battle. Her courage was contagious, and she called on Barak, the military leader of Israel, to lead the army against Sisera. However, Barak hesitated. He was filled with doubt and fear, and he refused to go unless Deborah accompanied him. This moment is a key turning point in the story, revealing not only Barak's lack of confidence but also Deborah's unwavering trust in God's plan. She agreed to go with him, but she made it clear that the glory of victory would not belong to Barak. It would belong to a woman. In the end, the prophecy came true, but not in the way anyone expected. Sisera, the feared commander, was defeated, and it was a woman named Jael who would deliver the final blow, killing him with a tent peg, fulfilling Deborah's prophecy. Deborah's role in Israel's victory was crucial. She wasn't just a passive observer. She was right at the center of the action, leading her people with wisdom and faith. Because of her leadership, Israel won a decisive victory, and peace was restored for 40 years. This victory wasn't just about military strength, it was about the strength of Deborah's faith and her trust in God's plan. It's a reminder that God doesn't choose leaders based on societal expectations or gender. Deborah's story shows us that when we are willing to listen to God's call, we can rise to leadership, no matter how improbable it may seem. Deborah's legacy is one of defying expectations and stepping into a role that was both daunting and essential. She teaches us that leadership isn't about power or position. It's about obedience, faith, and the courage to act when the time comes. Her story reminds us that with faith in God, anyone, no matter their background, can rise up to lead, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. And in Deborah's case, her faith and courage changed the course of history. Would you be willing to rise up like Deborah, even when the odds are against you? Have you ever wondered what it's like to be chosen by God for something great, something that seems impossible? For Deborah, this wasn't just a question, it was her reality. At a time when Israel was in the deepest despair, oppressed by the mighty King Jabin of Canaan and his ruthless commander Sisera, God called upon Deborah to lead his people. This wasn't just any ordinary calling. It was a divine message that would change the course of Israel's history. God chose Deborah during a time of darkness, when Israel had no king and was lost in moral decline. The Canaanites were oppressing Israel, and the Israelites had nowhere to turn. It was in the midst of this crisis that Deborah received a message from God to rise up as a leader, a judge, and a warrior for his people. In the Bible, it's clear that God's calling is not bound by societal expectations or human limitations. He chooses whom he wills, regardless of gender, status, or strength. What's truly remarkable is Deborah's response to God's call. In a society where women were often relegated to secondary roles, Deborah didn't hesitate. She didn't shrink back from the enormity of the task or worry about how others would perceive her. Instead, she embraced God's plan with unwavering faith and obedience. Deborah trusted that God had chosen her for a purpose, and that he would be with her every step of the way. She knew her leadership wasn't about her own strength or abilities. It was about trusting in God's guidance and walking in faith, no matter the obstacles. Her confidence wasn't born of arrogance but of humility, understanding that she was merely a vessel for God's will. Deborah's wisdom and guidance were also key to her success as a leader. When Barak, Israel's military leader, was hesitant to lead the army into battle against Sisera, Deborah didn't doubt God's plan. She spoke boldly and decisively, delivering the message she had received. Go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. This wasn't just a command, it was a declaration of faith. Deborah knew that victory wasn't reliant on military might alone. It was reliant on Israel's obedience to God. She trusted that if they followed God's plan, victory would be inevitable. Deborah's faith in God's promises was unwavering, and she knew that when God's people align with His will, nothing is impossible. Her leadership was a reflection of this trust in God's power, and it inspired confidence in others. Deborah knew that Israel's victory would come not through human strength, but through God's mighty hand. Have you ever seen two people come together with a common purpose, even when one of them is reluctant to take the first step? This was the relationship between Deborah and Barak, two leaders united by faith, but with very different approaches to the battle that lay ahead. Barak was a military leader of Israel, a man called by God to lead the army against Sisera, the commander of the Canaanite forces. However, when it came time to act, Barak hesitated. Despite the divine call, he refused to go unless Deborah, the prophetess and judge, accompanied him. His hesitation reveals something profound. Barak was a warrior, but he needed the spiritual assurance that Deborah brought. He knew that the victory wasn't about his skills or strength, but about God's guidance. Barak's reluctance wasn't born from fear of the enemy, but from a deep understanding that true success only comes when God's will is at the forefront. Deborah, ever wise and faithful, didn't rebuke him. Instead, she assured him of God's promise and agreed to go with him, reinforcing the spiritual foundation of their mission. She wasn't just a leader in name. Deborah was the spiritual force behind their mission, giving Barak the confidence to lead and trust that God would see them through. When Deborah and Barak led the Israelite army to battle, it was not just a fight for survival, it was a battle of faith. The Canaanites, under Sisera, had a far superior military force, including iron chariots and experienced soldiers. The odds were stacked against Israel, but Deborah knew that the real strength didn't lie in weapons or numbers. It lay in God's power. Deborah's leadership transcended the battlefield. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was the prophetic voice that reminded the Israelites that God was with them. As they ascended Mount Tabor, she was the one who held the spiritual vision, while Barak led the charge. Their teamwork was a powerful symbol of faith in action. Barak took the military lead, but Deborah's influence kept them grounded in trust that God's intervention would make the impossible possible. And God's intervention is exactly what happened. The Israelites didn't just win because of their strength. They won because of God's miraculous hand. As Sisera's army advanced, God sent a storm that turned the battlefield into a quagmire. Sisera's mighty chariots, once a symbol of invincibility, became stuck in the mud, rendering them useless. The Canaanites, once confident of victory, were thrown into chaos. The Israelites, empowered by their faith and Deborah's leadership, were able to take full advantage of this divine intervention, routing Sisera's forces and achieving an overwhelming victory. The battle was not won by human strategy alone. It was won by God's miraculous intervention. Deborah, as God's chosen prophetess, knew that the victory wasn't theirs to claim. It was God's. The storm that disabled Sisera's chariots was a testament to God's power and a reminder that when God is with his people, no enemy can stand. In the end, while Barak and Deborah's leadership worked hand in hand, it was clear that God's hand was the true force behind Israel's triumph. Their victory was not just military, it was a spiritual victory, a testament to the power of faith, trust, and obedience. Deborah's role as both a judge and prophetess wasn't just about guiding the people with wisdom, it was about leading them into battle, knowing that God would fight for them. And when they followed God's plan, the impossible became possible. Deborah's legacy extends far beyond the battlefields of ancient Israel. It lives on as a timeless symbol of leadership, faith, and courage. One of the most profound expressions of her legacy can be found in the Song of Deborah, Judges 5, one of the oldest and most beautiful pieces of poetry in the Bible. This song was composed by Deborah and Barak after Israel's victorious battle against Sisera. It's not just a celebration of military victory, it's a hymn of praise to God for his deliverance. The song highlights the bravery of the leaders, especially Deborah, and acknowledges the hand of God in securing the victory. Deborah's song serves as both a spiritual declaration and a powerful reminder that God was the true source of their success. It celebrates the strength of a people who trusted in God's plan, and Deborah's leadership stands as the guiding force that led them to triumph. Through this song, we see her deep connection to God and her recognition that the victory was His, not hers. Deborah's legacy as a leader, however, transcends her time. She stands as a beacon of courage, faith, and leadership for both women and men alike. At a time when women were typically excluded from positions of authority, Deborah rose above the societal norms and became a judge, prophetess, and military leader. She proved that leadership isn't about gender. It's about responding to God's call, trusting in His direction, and leading by faith. Deborah's story is a reminder that God can use anyone for His purpose, no matter their background, gender, or circumstances. Her legacy speaks to the heart of true leadership, which is not about power or prestige, but about service, wisdom, and the courage to stand for what is right, even when faced with great challenges. Deborah's story also challenges modern stereotypes about women in leadership. In a time when society had clear boundaries for gender roles, Deborah's leadership defied expectations. Her rise to power wasn't just about breaking societal norms, it was about fulfilling God's purpose for her life. Her role as a leader shows that women, just as much as men, can be powerful instruments in God's plan. Her influence wasn't limited by cultural expectations. She was called by God to lead and empowered by His strength. Deborah's life is a reminder that women have always had the potential to be leaders, and their voices, wisdom, and courage can change the course of history. Today, Deborah's story is more relevant than ever. In a world where leadership is often defined by power, authority, and control, Deborah's example reminds us that true leadership is rooted in wisdom, obedience, and faith. Her story teaches us that it's not the loudest or most powerful voices that lead. It's those who listen to God's calling and trust Him to guide them. In today's world, where leadership often looks like a competition for power, Deborah's life teaches us that God's way is different. True leadership isn't about self-promotion. It's about serving others, empowering those around you, and walking in God's will. Deborah's life offers several lessons that remain applicable in today's world. First, she teaches us the courage to move forward in the face of doubt. Just like Deborah, we may feel unprepared for the challenges ahead, but when we trust in God, He gives us the courage to take that first step. The second lesson is the power of teamwork. Deborah's partnership with Barak demonstrates that effective leadership often involves collaboration. While Deborah was the spiritual force behind the mission, Barak's role as the military leader was crucial. Together, they accomplished what neither could have achieved alone. Finally, Deborah's example encourages us to embrace the idea that anyone, regardless of gender, can be called to leadership if they walk in God's will. Her legacy is a call to men and women alike to rise to their God-given potential and lead with faith, wisdom, and courage. Through Deborah's story, we see that leadership is not about titles or roles. It's about being obedient to God's calling and trusting Him to lead us through even the most difficult challenges. Deborah's story is one of faith, courage, and divine guidance. She stands as a testament to the power of trusting in God's plan, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Her life reminds us that God has a purpose for everyone, and sometimes that purpose leads us to places we never expected. Whether you're facing your own personal battle or stepping into a new role of leadership, Deborah's example shows that with faith in God, victory is not only possible, it's promised. She was an ordinary woman chosen for an extraordinary task, and through her unwavering trust in God, she changed the course of history. As you reflect on Deborah's story, think about the challenges you face today. How can you rise like Deborah in your own life? Stepping into God's calling with faith and courage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear how you're applying Deborah's example of leadership and trust in your own journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more biblical stories that inspire and challenge us all to live with purpose, faith, and strength.